Ah, Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Vedic culture lovers. So, let's see. I don't want to start one. Okay, 3 o'clock. Here in Chawton, we're here in Chawton, England, in the Dom. Just kidding. So, we have some nice devotees here from all over the UK. And for today's topic, I thought I might talk about the culture wars that are going on now in the world between liberals and conservatives. I mean, the whole Brexit debate and Terexit, as they say. I mean, when the PM leaves. It's all part of that same thing. For example, in Europe, we see a rise of sort of populism and nationalism as a pushback against the European Union. And the reason that so many countries, whether it's Italy or Hungary or Czech Republic, I mean, and there's these populist movements even, I mean, everywhere in Holland, and Denmark, and Sweden, all over the UK, and there are growing sort of right-wing parties in France and Germany and all that. We could start Alternative for ISKCON. But anyway, so that's a joke. That's the German Populist Party. So, so what's going on in the world since we're trying to teach the world Krishna consciousness, and the world is kind of convulsed in these culture wars. And so there has been research done by scholars, good scholars, I think reasonably neutral scholars, about what's really going on, what's causing this liberal conservative culture war that's going on. And Hare Krishna, we have some few late clients here. So, Sri Prahlad is here. So, this is what we talked about earlier. I want to talk about what's going on in the world, this sort of this culture battle that's going on in the world, by comparing certain ways of thinking nowadays with what we would call our Vedic culture, to use the term. To use it correctly, actually, the term Vedic culture in terms of varnashram and so on. So, I think one of the problems nowadays is that we live in an age which is almost philosophically brain dead. Actually, you can come forward a little bit, everyone here. I'm unarmed, even though I'm American. I'm one of the small number of Americans that is not carrying some kind of assault weapon. So, there's not much philosophy nowadays because the world is so accelerated. People are mentally hydroplaning. They're on the surface of life, and philosophy requires you to think deeply. And it's just like a boat that's going very fast on the water can't go deep into the water. In the same way, world's moving so fast with social media and everything that there's very, very little deep thinking going on any topic, which is one of the problems. Because it's really when people think deeply, they can find common cause or they can find common denominators. And superficially, everything's different. Everyone is different. And so I think the superficiality of modern life is one of the reasons for all the conflict. But in any case, if someone was capable of what used to be called kind of prosaically thinking, then you would, the first thing you would have to consider is, who are we? Because if we're talking about what our rights are or what our duties are, and are we mostly people with duties or mostly people with rights, how do these two things work together? So I'll first give a picture of who we are according to our tradition, Vaishnava tradition, the Bhagavatam, Bhagavad Gita. Who are we? And of course, at the simplest level, you could say we're souls, we're eternal souls. And but at the same time, what does it mean in the material world? Because we're obviously not in the spiritual world, even though we're in Chawton. So we're eternal souls, but what is the how do we describe a soul in a material body in the material world? In terms of, let's say, on this, specifically on this issue of, do we mostly have duties or do we mostly have rights? Is it are people materially equal? What does it mean to be materially equal in a world in which empirically we're obviously not equal? And so first of all, in the Vedic conception, I would say we are born with duties. And our duties actually pre-exist even our birth. In other words, we have duties before we're born because we're eternal. We have previous lives. And so Prabhupada always gave this simple example, actually coming from the Bhagavatam. Yatha toror mulani shechanena. Just as by watering the root of a tree, tripyanti tatskanda bujopasaka. The tree's trunk and branches and twigs and so on are all satisfied by watering the root of the tree. And pranopaharat, by feeding the stomach, the vital, sort of like your core. Prana here means like your core. Pranopaharat jitendriyanam, just as by feeding your core, all of your senses are fed or nourished. Tataiva, exactly in that way, sarvarhanam achuteja. We do everything that we ought to do. Because arhanam is an interesting word there. It means something which ought to be done, actually from the same root. For example, was it the Buddhists, the Jains, they talk about their arhats, like the worthy people. And so something which is worthy to be done, something which ought to be done, is arhanam. So sarvarhanam. Everything that should be done, everything that is proper to be done, that's the only time you can do that. Everything that should be done will be done achuteja, by worshiping Achyuta, by worshiping Krishna. And so we are part of Krishna, as Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, Mamaivang Sajiva Loke. You are part of me alone. So why does stop? Yeah, you cannot keep moving around. I'm saying so. Yeah, that's over. So we're part of Krishna. And why does Krishna say Mameva, of me alone? You're part of me alone. Because in this world, because we're very tiny and cannot exist independently, a human baby put out in the wilderness will die very quickly. So therefore, we are part of many things. We are obviously part of a family. We are part of communities. We are part of societies. We are part of vocational organizations, guilds, or whatever. So we're part of many things. We can have political affiliations, cultural affiliations. So precisely because it is our very nature as tiny souls to be part of many larger things, larger groups, and to be connected to other people. For example, one can be part of a marriage. And so because we are part of many things, Krishna is emphasizing, actually, you're part of me alone. That's what you're really part of. That is your real identity, that you're part of me. And so common sense, the part-whole relationship, the part has to serve the whole, and in return, the whole obviously provides certain benefits to the part. For example, if you're a British citizen, then you have certain duties. You have to pay taxes. You have to follow certain laws. You have to drive on the wrong side of the street. It's an American. That's American arrogance right there. So if you're a British citizen, you have certain duties, but then the government has to provide certain services for you. For example, personal security. I mean, the government does all in its power to prevent chaos and anarchy so that you can actually walk safely down the street, or, that the people who, let's say, manage the underground, they actually do the maintenance on the cars. They don't crash or explode or whatever. So we are depending on society, the streets will be lit up at night, and that things will be organized properly so that every day there's food in the market. So in many, many ways, we are dependent on services and benefits provided by society. And in return, we have to serve society. Now, sometimes it goes too far on one side or the other. For example, you can have totalitarian regimes where basically you simply have to do everything for the state. And then again, there can be sort of chaotic liberal regimes where everyone talks about their rights, their rights, their rights, as if they had no duties to society. Their only duty is to grab all their rights. And so there is this part-whole relationship. And of course, the Bhagavatam gives the example of the body. The parts of the body serve the whole body. The hand can't eat. Even if you have the world's mightiest hand, you might, like, let's say, enter some power hand contest, and it turns out you can like crush granite in your hand, but still your hand can't eat. The hand has to give the food to the stomach. So we are part of Krishna. And then, of course, the question arises, if that's our relationship to God, we are obviously receiving many benefits from God, like we get to exist, which is, all the other benefits are based on existing. And so because of Krishna, we exist. And because of Krishna, we can fulfill our desires. Everything is actually resting on God. And so we have duties to God. We're getting so many benefits from God. But how does that, so the real question here is, for a devotee, how does the God-devotee, God-soul relationship, how does that translate into or map onto an individual society relationship? What is the best possible relationship, let's say, of a citizen to the state? What should it be? What kind of government should there be? And and so on and so forth. How much freedom should a government give if the government-citizen relationship is a reflection of the God-soul relationship? What would that look like? So in other words, yeah, so how is that primary original relationship of God to the soul, how should that be translated into political relationships? How should that be translated into an economic system? What economic system best represents the relationship of God to the soul? And so on. What should families look like? So these are the real questions. Now, when you get to secular society, secular, by the way, yeah, just sit on top of anyone. They're all very surrendered. Prahlad, you're very compliant. Happens to the best of sampradayas. So when we talk about secular society, secular means not religious. Why do we live in secular society? Why have almost all modern countries declared themselves to be secular? Which means that laws and governance and everything cannot be dictated by a religion. Obviously, there's a lot of coincidence. For example, the Bible says, "Thou shalt not kill," and we have secular laws against murder. So it's not that, so there's a lot of overlap between ethical and moral principles found in different religions and secular laws. But ultimately, for the purpose of this discussion, a secular state means that the definition of what is an appropriate relationship between a state, a government, and the citizens What kind of economic system should we have? What kind of laws? For example, religions may teach that sex outside of marriage is illicit. And yet, a society may say, but we can't have a law against that because that would be a religious law. Of course, then the question would arise is it a religious law? And this, actually, I want to bring in something else. I'm putting a lot of things on the table. And then, of course, I'll take them all away at the end because you cannot take them home. I'm just kidding. So, in order to understand, like, I mean, obviously, you can't make a law in a secular society just because some religion says that it's a law. But on the other hand, you can't reject a principle just because a religion teaches it. It may actually be in the rational self-interest of a society. And so, for example, I will quote here the famous question which Socrates posed to Euthyphro in a dialogue called, strangely enough, Euthyphro. So what Socrates said was, are some actions, paraphrasing, are some human actions good because the gods love those actions? Or do the gods love those actions because they are good? In other words, if we look at injunctions found in the scriptures of different religions, or let's say our tradition, Vaishnava tradition, are certain things, let's say, for example, probably the most popular aspect of the Hare Krishna movement by far, which is, of course, the 4 regular principles. That's why you all joined. Yes. Actually, there's a joke in ISKCON, so many devotees follow 3 principles: no meat, fish, or eggs. So if we look at the 4 regular principles, and if we ask a simple question, should those principles somehow be made into laws within a secular society? And going back to Euthyphro's question, do we follow those principles because Krishna inconceivably just doesn't want people to do those things? Or is there some rational scientific reason that we should follow those? And if we say, when I say rational scientific reason, that let's say that should be a law, it would not be enough to say that if you follow those principles, you will have a better life. Because one can assume that, and of course I'm getting ahead of myself, but let's say in a society like John Locke, he was an English person, an English living entity. John Locke, great philosopher in the 18th century, and he came up with this sort of somewhat revolutionary idea, which already was in the air, and that is that we are born free. That even though there's a king or queen, even though there's a government, even though we have so many centuries of feudal tradition and all that, still essentially as souls we are born free under God. That God, because we are under God, therefore in our human role we are actually born free, and yet we agree to give up some of our freedom for a greater good, and we give up that freedom by entering voluntarily into a social contract. If you think of what a contract is, in any contract, you give something, you get something. Either it's a contract where you'll pay so much money, and in return, someone will give you certain goods or services, or they'll give you money and you give them goods and services. Contracts are basically quid pro quo. You give this, you get that. And so Locke said that in the social contract, obviously people cannot live well in savagery as brutes, that all of us, in order to have a good life, must live to some extent within a society. And therefore, acting in our own rational self-interest, we agree to live within a society, and in order for society to function, we all have to contribute to the society. We have to follow common laws. We have to pay taxes, otherwise there can't be a society, and it's in our rational self-interest to live within a society. For example, you could go out into the wilderness or, get a sailboat and just go off into the middle of the ocean, and you could do whatever you want. You don't even have to put clothes on. You could, scream and yell. You can do whatever you want, but who wants to live like that? Who wants to live out in the desert or on top of a mountain or out in the ocean? You can do that. You can leave society and have unlimited freedom, but you'll exercise your freedom within a pretty miserable context. So Locke said we give up some of our freedom in order to live within a society. We enter into a social contract. Now the question is, are there good reasons to make our 4 regulative principles part of the social contract? And as I said, the fact that, let's say, if it's the case that we're right, and we're always right, because we're the Hare Krishnas. Even if we steal your flowers, we're right. We don't steal flowers anymore, do we? Yeah. What's happened to that great old Hare Krishna movement? Terrible. Devotees actually pay for flowers nowadays. Anyway, so if it turns out to be the case that you will individually have a better life by following these 4 principles, that would still not justify requiring society itself to follow the principles by establishing laws. Because after all, you as an individual have a right to mess yourself up. I mean, if you want to have a terrible, miserable life, that's your choice. But is it in society's rational interest, let's say, to institute our 4 principles? Is it in society's interest? And so I will argue here that it is. Because, that's the way to spread the movement. Just go out everywhere and tell people about the 4 regular principles, right? It's always been the best preaching. Just kidding. So, but I'll give an argument for that. That it's actually in society's rational interest to either strongly encourage by cultural means or even by laws that those principles should be established. So, what should we start? Which principles should we start with, Rupa?
Which one should we start with? Amongst those 4, you mean?
Okay, let's start with meat eating.
Yeah. Oh, I was thinking.
Yeah. Hey, nice to see you. We're talking about the 4 regular principles, but from a socio-juridical perspective. I once asked a very nice devotee lady if she was pregnant. She wasn't. And that's the last time I ever asked. It's like, you just like wish a hole would open up in the ground. You could see it. Okay, meat eating really is sort of the health equivalent of smoking tobacco. And so why does the government heavily tax tobacco? Because people who smoke actually become a burden on society. People who smoke, tend to become very sick, and guess who pays for their medical expenses? Because most people that smoke aren't rich. Society does. So if you smoke, I have to pay for it. I have to pay for your smoking. Because if you smoke, it's very likely you'll get all kinds of serious health problems, and then you'll go to some public hospital, and I have to pay for it, along with all the other citizens. So in the American Revolution, the battle cry was, at least at one point, no taxation without representation. Ironically, when the English people in the New World, who thought they were English up until the war started, they were actually demanding the rights of Englishmen. That's actually what they were demanding. They wanted the same rights that English people in England had. Namely, that if we're going to be taxed, which they were, that we should be able to elect representatives to the taxing body, which was Parliament. So they actually had a valid a complaint, and then the parliament recognized too late they'd become a little too selfish and stupid, and so then they tried to, anyway, that's history. But if you consider this cry, no taxation without representation, that if someone is going to tax you, you have a right to join the conversation about how you're being taxed. And so if, let's say, if you live in this country and you pay taxes, then you are subsidized, you are paying out of your pocket for people that do things like smoke and drink. You're being taxed for that. And so what we find is in many countries like America, due to all the political corruption, which is just, you know, that's what governments do, they corrupt. The meat industry is practically subsidized, because otherwise meat would be extremely expensive. I mean, you all know all the arguments about meat eating, the fact that it's a hydrological catastrophe, the amount of water it uses up, water resources and all that, et cetera, et cetera. But so therefore, health-wise, when people eat meat, that's what I tell them. I say, well, that's like you're smoking. You eat meat, that's the health equivalent of smoking. So we're being taxed for it. Also, people who do eat meat, meat is carcinogenic, especially beef, carcinogenic. There's a good chance you'll get cancer. And so if society is being taxed, society has a legitimate right to regulate behavior which taxes it. So exactly what and then of course there's the ethical issue of the cruelty to conscious beings. See, if you say that human beings have certain rights and animals don't have, because human beings are more intelligent, which obviously is, you know, that's kind of a laugher right there. But let's go along with it for a while, this idea that human beings are more intelligent. It's certainly, why shouldn't it be proportional? In other words, who gets to declare there's just like one cutoff point? So if you're above the line, you have all these rights, and if you're below the line, you have no rights. And if that's true anyway, what about a human being that's below the rights? Why is a mentally, what's the word we're allowed to use now? Disabled. Yeah. It's like every few years they tell us what we're allowed to say. Let's say someone is mentally impaired and is functionally, demonstrably, empirically less intelligent than some animals. Why should that human being have rights? The real fact is there's no overarching, there's no general understanding of where do rights come from, under what conditions do you have rights, who should have rights, are rights proportional? For example, let's say someone that works for the police or some other, let's say one of those James Bond agencies, even M, you know, M is in James Bond movies. It's Judith Dench. No one knew it was her, right? How many of you actually knew that she was actually the head of the British Secret Service? Anyway, so they have certain rights. For example, they can put on their sirens or flashing red lights and go above the speed limit. They can carry all kinds of lethal weapons. And if you're 00, you actually have the right to kill. You all know this, don't you? I mean, come on, this is basic English culture. So anyway, so we do give people certain rights. Or for example, let's say if you do very well on certain kinds of standard tests, you can go to Oxford or Cambridge. And if you don't do that well, maybe you can't go. So what about, why should a human being, let's say who's mentally impaired, have more rights than an animal who's actually more intelligent? If you make the general statement that intelligence gives rights, because you're a human being, you have certain rights, but it's not that simple. Why shouldn't it be proportional? Why shouldn't they give just a test, and then whoever gets a higher score, you get more votes based on how much intelligence you have? So how do you have this equality? So what you do is they pull this hierarchy thing on the animals. Well, we're humans. We're more intelligent. So we have all the rights. You have no rights. But then among the humans, suddenly we're all equal, even though we're obviously not. And even though some people are just kind of like the walking unconscious. And yes, and some people are very intelligent. So why not use that same logic with animals? Root.
Well, I was going to say that sometimes they could argue, well, or we could say that humanism is sort of has dispossessed theology. Now, this is philosophy of humanism.
Decapitated theology.
Throughout the world. And it's sort of like, this is, we're the crown of creation, and dominion means do whatever the hell we want.
You mean people who actually quote the Bible on that?
Yeah, often they talk about dominion over the animals.
Well, you could say the government has dominion over the people, but you can't just kill them all. In fact, I'm going to look up in the dictionary now. As a bona fide guru, I have a dictionary. Only bona fide gurus actually have dictionaries. Let's see. Dominion means sovereignty or control. The Apple dictionary, Google dictionary is usually really bad. But actually, dominus in Latin means God. And so, so dominion has power. So the government has power over you. You can talk about, well, it's a democracy, so therefore we have the power to hire and fire them. But actually, once you elect the government, they really have dominion. If you're stopped by a police person in the street, you can't say, you work for people that we elected, power to the people. No, that's not going to happen. But again, in a secular society, you can't say that as human beings we have rights and animals don't because the Bible told me so. You can't pull that one in the modern world. So that's not an answer. The Bible told me so is not an answer. Anything else? Anyone else want to try? Yes.
Whoever is most powerful, being kind of humans, being at the top of the food chain, you kind of get to decide who's below you or not because they can't really speak out for themselves.
Okay, the law of the jungle. The problem with the law of the jungle is if you go with that explanation, then the only immoral act, let's say, committed by Hitler was that he lost the war. Because if he would have won the war, everything he did would have been moral. Because he's a reigning power. So we don't really want to go with the law of the jungle. I think it's, the philosophical consequences are pretty awful. So you can't quote the Bible. You don't want the law of the jungle. So anyone else?
Sense of ethics.
Okay, sense of ethics. But ethics means, okay, back to the dictionary. Dirty trick using the dictionary. Ethics, moral principles that govern a person's behavior. And moral just means what's right and wrong. But that's circular reasoning. Circular reasoning means that the basic structure of let's say, of an argument, like a typical deductive argument would be, to give the cliche things, I can't think that well after lunch. All men are mortal. Women, of course, are immortal. But it typically goes like this. Let's say, human beings are mortal. Socrates is a human being, therefore Socrates is mortal. But you can't say, for example, Socrates is mortal, therefore Socrates is mortal. That's not an argument. Because the evidence is the same as the conclusion. And so to say it's ethical for human beings, the thing you're trying to prove is that human beings should have all the rights and animals none. That's what you're trying to prove. And you can't say that that's true because it's the right thing. In other words, it's the right thing because it's the right thing.
But because of ethics, people are coming towards vegetarianism.
No, but what I'm saying is, but what's the underlying ethical principle? I mean, okay, I see what you're saying. Yeah, I mean, it's true, but then again, okay, let's take that. Let's say more people are becoming vegetarian because they realize that animals do have rights. But then, in that case, but of course, we're talking about people that don't say that. But if you want to talk about people that do say that, then the question would be, on what basis do they say that? Even though most people are not philosophical and they don't translate their feelings into a recognizable philosophical principle, but we're supposed to be philosophers, right? We're the Hare Krishnas. I mean, we do other things besides overeat. That's not all we do. And so an ethical principle. So then the question would be, why is it the right thing to not cause terrible suffering to animals, to not subject them to cruelty? Why is that the right thing to do? What ethical principle justifies saying that?
Empathy.
But you could just insist on, well, this is our tradition. We've always done this, so it's okay.
Well, that's not philosophy. That's a song from Fiddler on the Roof. Tradition.
That's book.
So then the question would be, what did you say back there?
Empathy.
Empathy, okay. El diccionario. We'll do the rest of the class in Spanish. Let's see. Empathy is the ability to understand and share the feelings of another. So if you say we shouldn't be cruel to animals or to anyone because we can share and understand their feelings, but why? But if we go deeper, why should that be the case? What if, for example, you hate someone and you understand they're really suffering and you're very happy? In fact, you're actually torturing them. And, it's like one of those horrible movies they have where they have a whole torture kit. They open the box. There's all these horrible instruments. And so what if you understand exactly how the person's feeling and that's why you're
rejoicing?
Yeah, and then that's why you're torturing them. I mean, this is a very dark scenario, but in other words, why should it be the case that because I can understand how someone else is feeling, therefore I will treat them nicely? Why should that be the case?
Well, would you like to be treated like that?
But the golden rule, do unto others before they do it unto you. And so, see, there's something missing here. That's what I'm trying to get at. Philosophically, there's still something missing. Because you could say, do unto others before they do it unto you. You could say, for example, I believe that there is no God, there is no higher anything, and therefore my life is all about pursuing my own interest. And I define my self-interest as maximizing pleasurable sensations, or, and it actually gives me a thrill to have power over other people. So I want to enslave other people because the more power I have over them, the better I feel. Obviously, we're not talking about a kind of person you'd want to have as a close friend. So, but what if someone says that? What is the answer to such a person? That's what, don't impose your values on me. And enslaving other people, exploiting other people, raping, all that stuff. It's just what makes me happy. And I know that you have similar feelings, but I win, you lose. It's just like let's say like in a cricket match. Cricket's very popular in America among British expatriates. So let's say there's a cricket match. You know very well what the other players are feeling on the other team because they're, you're all professional cricket players. And yet you want to beat them. Yes?
Could you justify it on grounds of theory of evolution, where
nature has dictated a sense of survival and reproduction. So any act that limits that or restricts it is going against nature.
Okay, I should repeat it for the people on Facebook. One could give an argument in terms of evolution theory, saying that, what was it again? This is a terrible argument, go ahead.
Any act against the living being that is contrary to the principles of evolution.
Any act against the living being is contrary to the principles of evolution. Darwin, by the way, back to Chuck, Darwin said exactly the opposite. Darwin said survival of the fittest. In fact, it's very interesting, in the late 1800s in merry old England, to see how people were interpreting Darwin. Here in Britain, people like Thomas Huxley, who was an atheist, and there was a very popular movement among intellectuals, scientists, called social Darwinism, which was that, and you see this actually, although this is a little bit earlier, you see this very clearly in A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. God, I still cry when I see that. Anyway, Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens, where Scrooge, the unrepentant early Scrooge, when he's asked to give charity for the people that are starving and poor, and he refuses. And then the people who are working to help the poor, these gentlemen, they're shocked, and they say, but they'll starve. And Scrooge says, well, that's good, because it will reduce the surplus population of the earth. And there was even this guy Malthus, this Malthusian economic theory, that there's just always too many people. And so some of them die off in war, famine, or starvation, whatever. That's just nature doing its job. In fact, let's see how far we can take this dark theory down the road. It's a fact in forestry science that, I remember when I was in British Columbia years ago, and I was told that these great forests in British Columbia were actually becoming weaker because the government prevents and suppresses forest fires. And actually, in order to have a robust forest with very healthy trees, you need natural, not man-made, but natural forest fires which eliminate the weaker trees. And so Darwin is all about survival of the fittest. And nothing could be more against Darwin's, let's say, the laws of nature, according to Darwin. Nothing could be more against that than, let's say, feeding the poor, or keeping people on very expensive life support systems when they no longer can render any practical service to society. And it's not by an accident that one of Darwin's most enthusiastic supporters, the one who actually carried out within a country a social Darwinist project, carried it out. That person, of course, was Adolf Hitler. Big fan of Darwin. And so when Hitler was sending millions of people to their death, he thought, this is Darwinism at its best. There are certain people that just, it's like that, just don't bring me down. These people are just, I don't like them around. They're not good for, we want a robust humanity, sort of Teutonic. So therefore, all these social welfare systems, keeping, let's say, people who can't really make a serious contribution to society, keeping them alive on expensive life support, feeding the poor, totally against Darwinism. And of course, you can always try to concoct some, artificial theory. Well, no, because if we keep the poor alive or keep the sick alive, that will encourage the people who are still healthy to serve the society because they'll see society, blah, blah, blah. But what if not? What if that's not true? So getting back to the point here, because after all, you know, we're supposed to be the philosophers, Brother Hare Krishnas. We don't only just eat a lot and steal flowers. So therefore, why, in terms of animals, why should animals be denied their rights? Or do they have rights? That's actually begging the question. Do animals have rights? And if you say human beings have rights, because they even call it human rights, which is, of course, speciesism. Just as there's racism, sexism, there's speciesism. And so why should human beings, I mean, even if you say, as soon as you link rights to intelligence, rights to level of consciousness, as soon as you make any connection like that, all kinds of questions arise. Since animals are conscious, in some cases more intelligent than some human beings in impaired states, so how do you assign rights? And if we link rights to intelligence, why should much more intelligent people have the same amount of rights as very unintelligent people? After all, Socrates gave the argument that just as if you're on a boat, you want a captain that actually knows how to navigate, so how can the ship of state be run by amateurs? Yeah.
Happens all the time.
It's the default thing. Yeah,
So maybe we'll go with the utilitarian argument of greatest good for the greatest number.
but how will you justify that?
It's going to be a judgment call, but we're going to decide. We're going to reason.
Well, back
and
up.
Debate.
Back up.
This is social debate.
Yeah. I want to get into this. Your utilitarianism, because this is really a good point. Utilitarianism, right, is saying that that the government or society should pursue the greatest good for the greatest number of people. So my question, but that assumes, you see, the point is, doing a little philosophy here, right? Any English sentence that has the auxiliary verb should, and you just did that. I can't believe you used that auxiliary verb. I'm so disappointed. Anyway, so any English sentence that has the auxiliary verb should, we should pursue the greatest good, is a metaphysical claim. Because in terms of empiricism, ordinary science, empiricism can only tell us what is, like the house is red, the bird is blue, I'm hungry. You know, that empiricism just tells you what is. To say that something should, if you say the bird is blue, we understand what that means. Of course, you know, we can talk about optics. Where's the blueness? Is it in your eyes? Is it in the bird? Anyway, skip all that. We'll just say there's a blue bird. Let's just, you know, be simple here. That's a blue bird. So we know what that means. But if I say you should feed the bird, a sentence about what you should do is not something that you can empirically investigate.
We're discussing philosophy, and so...
No, but you said, yeah, but that doesn't matter. This is philosophy. I'm saying you use a sentence with the word should. So you use a sentence with the word should, and I'm saying, how do you justify any English sentence or a similar sentence in other languages that has the word should in it? What does it mean? The bird is blue, Chawton is southwest of London, and so on and so forth. We know what those things mean. But what does it mean to say that someone should do something?
My opinion.
Well, but is it just opinion? For example, if I say that you should not murder innocent people, is that my opinion? Or is it somehow a fact in the universe that we should not murder innocent people? And if it is a fact in the universe that we shouldn't murder innocent people, how is that true?
You were asking for the basis for an argument for vegetarianism. So there's an implicit asking for a should there. And so if we're to make an argument, what basis should it, where should it rest, what should it rest on? And so we could try with the utilitarian argument of it actually does promote the greatest good for the greatest number.
But then you have to ascertain what is good. Who says
Happiness.
what
Okay,
We'll go with
actually, in fairness to the people who are in Facebook Loca, Rupa Vilasmagala said, well, first Prahlad, you said, Prahlad actually did a very clever little.
Prabhupada's argument also about good,
Yeah.
though, that you say you want to do good.
Sri Prahlad, first, he actually did a little move there. I'm just going to show that in slow motion here so you can see what his move was. He said that since we're having a philosophical discussion, and since I asked why, for example, should we give rights to animals or why should we only give rights to humans, that means I'm calling for a should. And I would say not exactly. For the simple reason that a possible answer to my question is there is no good reason. So if I say, why should we do something? It's possible to say we should do it because of this reason, or someone could say there is no good reason and actually there's nothing we should or should not do. There are only things that we do or don't do. And, by the way, because if we actually live in an empirical universe, which is the stupidest idea since, I don't know, since what? Since eating raw wheat. It's, instead of making chapatis. This is a point I've been making a lot. I don't know if you've been following my, I've been giving a lot of class on this, at least I was, that how we live in a bidimensional universe, you know all that. And so, like take, for example, England, where they have democracy, sort of. And this, anyway, I will resist the great urge to make some jokes now about what's going on with the government here. And the Prime Minister and so on. Okay, I'm here on a tourist visa, I better not. So, but consider the system of democracy where you elect representatives. It's a republic. I mean, in the sense, a Republican sense that it's not literally democracy. Demos in Greek means the people, and so democracy literally means rule by the people. So what in America, in the UK, we actually have republics, which means that the people elect representatives and they govern. The people don't actually govern. And so what's interesting is that the whole justification of democracy, even Republican democracy, the whole justification is that we're equal, so everybody gets one vote. I could say, well, I have a higher college degree, so I should get 5 votes. But no, right? That won't happen. So democracy is based on the assumption that we're equal. Now, you can't prove empirically we're equal. Give everyone tests, and you'll find we're all unequal. And yet, it's a metaphysical. It's not a physical fact that we're equal. But you could say it's a metaphysical fact. It's something which is not empirical, but somehow it's true anyway, even though we can't empirically demonstrate it because it's meta. Meta means beyond. So that being the case, America, Great Britain, all the modern countries, in establishing a form of government, they reject all the empirical science and base their governments on metaphysical assumptions, such as that we're equal, which is empirical nonsense. But we claim it as a metaphysical truth. That means in establishing how we should live, we subordinate all the empirical science in the world to metaphysical assumptions. Is that a religious assumption? Is that actually mixing politics and religion by having democracy? Because the assumption that we're equal, which is totally non-empirical, it's meaningless empirically, is a metaphysical assumption. And so how are we equal? If our bodies are different, our bodies are obviously different. And so what part of us is equal? What part of us is equal? You could say it's the soul, that as souls were equal, but you're not allowed to say that in secular democracy. So our bodies, if our bodies are unequal, what part of us is equal? Even our organs aren't equal. Some people have more efficient lungs than other people. Some people have healthier hearts than other people. And so if you say we're equal within a strict empirical framework, you're just babbling. It's just utter nonsense. So therefore, when you say should, if I say, for example, you should be kind to other people, or you should not kill innocent people, then who am I talking to? If I'm just speaking to a material machine, the body with all, the whole nervous system and everything, what does it mean to say you should or shouldn't do something? But now you said, so if we say that we should not be cruel to other creatures, then the question is why? Why shouldn't we? What if I say, I like it? Some people, what is that? Hannibal something in Silence of the Lambs? What's that?
Hannibal Lecter.
Yeah, that played by an English person, by the way. Anthony Hopkins. Anthony Hopkins is when he what?
He's Welsh.
Oh, he's Welsh.
That explains it.
So he's British. He taught, actually, he one of the top drama schools in the world is at UCLA, near where I live, and so he went and taught a semester there. And when he was there, he used to go to Govinda's restaurant, which is nice. So, but yeah. So getting back to the animal question, what we're doing now is philosophy, by the way. Hope it's not giving anybody a headache. So, why should we deny or grant rights to animals? And what's ultimately underlying that? If you say we should do the best for the most people, then the question, of course, is why should we do that?
Oh yeah. Well, we could make an argument of broader, I want to say, public interest, social interest.
But what if I say I don't care about public or social interest? My goal is to do anything I can, if I can get away with it,
Yeah, but our society won't allow you because.
However, if I say that I follow the law only because if I don't, I will suffer and I don't want to suffer, that's of course like an animal, right? You train an animal that if you defecate inside the house, you get beaten by a stick. And so the animal learns to walk out of the house to do its thing. But that doesn't mean we should do it. For example, let's say I have a house and I have a pet dog, as most sannyasis do. They're lonely. Just kidding. That was a joke. So let's say if I had a dog and I don't want the dog to do it inside the house because it acts, I find it disgusting. And therefore, whenever the dog is about to do that in the house, I hit it with a stick and the dog learns to go outside. Or I give it a reward. If you're on the left, then you give the dog a reward to attract it to come out. And so, but that's just because I prefer that. And so if I say a dog should act in a certain way, or you should act in a certain way, if you or the dog want to avoid pain, because I will cause you to experience pain if you do something I don't like. And therefore, if it's the case that you don't want to experience pain, you shouldn't do that. But that's not the same as saying in a moral sense that you should or shouldn't should or should not do something because that's the right thing. That's a different idea. You're the soul, right? Yes, Rupa.
You started out with basically an argument in favor of the four regulative principles, saying that it could be established. I think you were trying to say this. They could be empirically established.
Right.
That this is for the greater good, without having to pose some sort of religious or theological.
Yeah, Rupa said that I started out by saying that we could justify the four regulative principles without resorting to a religious argument. Yeah.
So
maybe we'll tie everything up
are you
together.
going to go through each one of the four regulative principles, or I'm just curious?
Okay, so maybe I'll try to tie everything up because we're kind of going all over the place here. There has to be some, it seems to me, there has to be some foundational principle that I think I think philosophically we would have to claim that in the world, in the universe and beyond the universe, you could, I mean, sometimes the word universe in English just means everything that exists as opposed to one self-enclosed, material space. So if we're talking about everything that exists, then we would say, and it's true, that there actually are higher and lower states of being. And the higher states of being are higher because they increase everything that's ultimately of true value, namely consciousness, happiness, and existence itself. It's just like Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, foods in the mode of goodness promote longevity and existence and health and happiness. So, we would say that it's actually self-evidently desirable and self-evidently the right that there. You know what foundationalism is? Honk if you know what foundationalism is. Oh, you don't. Not because you don't know what foundationalism is. Okay. Foundation, and I want to get back to the principles and everything, because after having sort of done all the skepticism, I don't want to leave everyone hanging like this. So foundationalism is an epistemological theory. Epistemology means how do you know you know. Episteme in Greek means knowledge. So epistemology means a serious, philosophical study of knowledge. Under what conditions are you justified in saying that you know something? Because someone could say, well, that's just your opinion. That's just your opinion. So under what minimum conditions can you reasonably say that it's not your opinion, you actually know something? For example, someone could say, well, you just believe in Krishna. You have faith that Krishna's there. If you say, well, I know Krishna's there, what does that mean? What is it, when we say I know something, what are we actually saying in a general sense? So Aristotle, Bhakti Aristotle, he started out as a temple commander in Macedonia. And anyway, so Aristotle pointed out that whatever you claim to be true, someone could just say, I don't believe it, prove it. Or like, for example, let's say you claim that I am really in Chawton, Hampshire, right now. And someone says, prove it. And so you could say, well, this GPS accurately displays the geography of Great Britain, and it shows that I'm in Chawton. So I could say, well, maybe your GPS, you just programmed it like we could be on the moon right now, but your GPS is going to say that we're in Chawton. So how do you prove that's actually reliable GPS? Or we could get testimony, say, we'll just walk up to anybody, and I could say, well, or someone could say, you just paid those people to say we're in Chawton right now. Those are actors. And so even if you make a simple statement like I'm in Chawton right now, if someone's a determined skeptic, if they're determined to doubt everything, then they can present arguments. You could say, no matter what you do, you could say, well, look, I can actually take my GPS apart, show you that it's functioning properly, and then they can doubt that, and so on. So Aristotle said that when you claim something is true, anything, you can be pushed into an infinite regress. Regress means going backwards. You know, the opposite is progress. Progress obviously means to go, no brainer. So ingress, to go in, regress, to go backwards, progress, and so on, or just to gress. So Aristotle said that you can be pushed into an infinite regress of proofs. So what do? If you want to establish that you really know something, that something is actually true, and someone is trying to push you into an infinite regress of proofs, how do you stop that?
How can you stop it?
Yeah.
If you're coming across someone like that who's just unknown.
Well, no, but we're not, I mean, if people do not accept good reasons, they're not interesting to us. I mean, you know, like if someone is not reasonable, then why waste time with them? We're talking about what can be said to reasonable people. So, what Aristotle said, and interestingly, he said the exact same that Lord Chaitanya said. Aristotle and Lord Chaitanya said the same thing. So what Aristotle said is that you have to establish that something is self-evident. It just proves itself. So therefore, if someone says, well, prove it, you don't have to, because it proves itself. It's like, for example, let's say the sun is in the sky right now. Oh my God, it's England and the sun is, yeah, so the sun is there. Now, we all know the sun is there in the sky. If someone says, prove it, and you say, well, look, you can see the sun, and they say, I don't see it, then at that point, we're not going to play games with them. At that point, we conclude either this person is just being whimsical, or this person is visually impaired. In either case, if the person is just being whimsical and just trying to play games with you, then why waste time? And if the person is visually impaired, why waste time? They won't listen to you. So, because it's self-evidently true that that's the sun there. It proves itself. Like they say, you can't hold a candle to the sun. So the Lord Chaitanya said the same thing in his talks with Sarvabhauma and Prakashananda, that the Vedas, especially we read Bhagavatam and Bhagavad Gita, are self-evidently true. When we read the Bhagavad Gita in the right state of consciousness, then as we read it, the Gita proves to us that it's true. The quality of our experience of reading Shastra proves to us, because when we read something like Krishna says, I'm the source of everything, the proof or the direct experience of what Krishna is saying is actually in the words themselves. So if you read it submissively, you actually experience the truth of it. So, so getting back to our point about morality, if we say certain things are right and wrong, and actually it's self-evidently true. For example, if you hear that someone, let's say, did some horrible thing, like in the Boer War, which is basically, it was England's attempt to completely control South Africa, which was ruled by, who's it, the Dutch? And Winston Churchill went there as a correspondent to cover it. When I was, I think in middle school, about 13 years old or 14, I wrote a big school report on Winston Churchill. Went to the library and just basically copied everything. So the British did. There was one general, it wasn't the British, it was one general. He, he's kind of real confident, who's afraid of the big bad Boers. And so he led his troops into a certain area he thought was good high ground, but they're surrounded by higher hills. And the Boers, they were really smart. They were sort of these, Afrikaner farmers, and they were really good shots, and they were really tough. And they just went on a higher hill and just kind of massacred, really shot down killed a lot of British. And so this general thought, okay, that's it. You want to play dirty? We'll play dirty. So what he did is, this is actually real English history. He he realized these Boers are all farmers. They depend for their livelihood. Their families depend on their farming. So he went to their farms and just started burning all their farms down, shooting all their animals, and starving them out. And they, you know, it was becoming a crisis for the Boers. So what they did is they, their wives and children left their land and were sort of taken into custody by the British troops. And then this general just let them starve. And so hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, I don't know if it was thousands, of literally women and children starved. And of course, the Boers surrendered because this was just horrible. So we hear about something like that. I'm not going to go into this big anti-colonial rant here, but if we look at things, and we could look at every country in the world and find some evil. And oh, by the way, you could say, well, that shows the British are no better than anyone else. But actually, when the news of this came back to Britain, the government fell. So it was one general that did this, and again, when the British people found out about that, they threw out the government. So it's not that the British people were into it. Anyway, so something like that, starving women and children, we know that it's wrong, and we know self-evidently that it's wrong. That's the point. It's just like empirically. I'll try to do this quickly. I've said this many times before, but oh my God, it's 4:11. For example, is there water here? Oh, yes. For example, let's say you're an empirical scientist. To be an empirical scientist, you also have to claim that something is self-evidently true. You also can be, an empirical scientist is the easiest person in the world to be pushed into an infinite regress of proofs. I mean, that's like child's play. All you have to do is say, how do you know there's a real physical world outside your mind? This is the philosophical problem. Descartes called it the evil genius. What if there's some evil genius that has you in his laboratory and just making you think that you're in a world, that there are other people that exist besides you? But it's really just your mind playing tricks on you. And of course, in modern philosophy, they call it the brain in a vat. What if you're just a brain in a vat? Your brain being manipulated to make you think that you're in a nice English village, or that you're a Hare Krishna, or that you should steal those flowers. Sorry, recycling that joke. So, what if you're a brain in a vat? And there is no world. There is no Earth. There is no Great Britain. There's no Chawton. So what do you reply to that? I mean, how do you prove? You can't empirically prove. You can't say, well, I can prove that there is a real material world because this is a real water bottle. Look, you can see it. I could give it to you, except that I won't because it's my water. But like, here's a real water bottle. That's circular reasoning. This is a real water bottle only if there's a real world. So you can't say that there's a real world because this is a real water bottle, because there's only a real water bottle if this is a real physical world. And if the physical world is just an illusion, so is the water bottle. So therefore, if you want to be an empirical scientist, you have to make a leap of faith. They don't know they're doing this because most scientists wouldn't know philosophy if they tripped over it. But what they're actually doing is a leap of faith. They're saying that even though I can't empirically prove there's a real physical world outside my mind, my experience of the world proves itself to me, and therefore I'm going to assume it's true. That is my epistemological foundation. That's why it's called foundationalism. In other words, you have to build your knowledge system, whether it's Krishna consciousness or material science or art. You believe that some art is really good art. Whatever your knowledge system is, it has to be built on a foundation. And that's foundationalism. So here's my point. If I say to you, why do you assume that there's a real world outside your mind? even though you could be a brain in a vat. Not very sexy, is it? Hey, my brain in a vat really thinks your brain in a vat is cute. Very romantic, isn't it? Anyway, but let me just finish this point. So if we say, why do you accept there's a real world? Because the answer, it has to be something like the nature of my experience of this world, the quality of it, the way I experience the world outside myself shows itself self-evidently. It proves itself to me that it's a real world outside my mind. And therefore, what we're left with is not that you can prove there's a material world, which is philosophically absurd, but that the experience of a world outside your mind proves itself to you. Therefore, it's self-evident. Now, for example, when we hear, let's say that some person has killed a bunch of children, and we're horrified by it, as we should be horrified, and we know that's wrong. We know that is evil. And my point is, we know it is evil as clearly and as deeply as we know there's a real world outside our mind. Because in fact, every time you go to sleep and dream, you think something else is the real world. When you're in the dream, and sometimes you're dreaming, you know it's a dream, but usually you're dreaming that you know it's a dream, right? It's a dream about another dream. And so, now you wake up. Let's say you're dreaming, you wake up. And as soon as you wake up, you know that somehow your waking state is more real than your dream state. Now, how do you know that? You can't prove it. We could imagine, without contradicting logic, for example, if you say, I have in my room upstairs a square circle. Now, that's logically impossible. You don't have to go up there and say, okay, I don't know why you said that. Gurus say all kinds of things. So you don't have to go up to my room to check to see if I really have a square circle. If you know what the English word square means, and if you know what the English word circle means, you know it is impossible to have a square circle. It cannot exist because if you say in English square circle, you actually didn't say anything. It's a literally nonsensical statement. It has no sense. It's a meaningless juxtaposition of words. It doesn't mean anything. It doesn't refer to anything. And so in that sense, something can be logically impossible. Like to give Aristotle's case, it is and it isn't. Now there's beta, but that's not a contradiction. To say that we're one with God, we're different from God, is not a contradiction for the simple reason that in both cases, when we say we're one with God or different from God, we are not saying that in an absolute sense. We are not absolutely one with God, and we are not absolutely different from God. There's only one person who is absolutely one with God, and that's God. He's one with himself. No one else is absolutely one with God. And when we say we're different from God, we do not mean that we're absolutely different. Because if we were, we couldn't understand anything God was trying to tell us. We were absolutely different. And so that's one and different. But in the case of a square circle, we can say that a square is 100% a square. Whereas if we say I'm one with God, I'm not 100% one with God, and I'm not 100% different from God. But a square is 100% a square and 0% a circle. So, so getting back to this point, when we dream, we ourselves, whoever you are, you believe that's the real world when you're dreaming. And when you wake up, you find out it's not. Because the quality of your waking consciousness proves to you by itself that this is real, not what you're. It's just like when we start to become Krishna conscious. Exactly in the same way, it is self-evident to us that the world experienced through Krishna consciousness is more real than the world experienced in material consciousness. It's analogous to waking up from a dream. But getting back to the moral issue of like why we shouldn't kill animals or why animals have rights, even though most of the time we think this is a real world, and sometimes when we're dreaming we think something else is a real world, there is no time in our lives, either waking or dreaming, when we think that it's all right to kill innocent people. So if you compare these two metaphysical assumptions, or that there really is a world outside my mind, an objective world, and the reason I take the train every day to a particular place is because the laws of nature haven't changed. And the train that existed yesterday still exists, and the people who worked on the train still work there. And so, so our self-evident knowledge that certain things are morally wrong is in a sense more real to us. We experience it at a deeper level even than we experience there's a real world. Because when we dream, we become confused about that. But even in dreams, we never become confused about the evil, let's say, of killing children. We never become confused about that. And so if it's a case, if we know, we don't just believe. Now, if you say that evolution has wired us to believe that it's wrong to kill children, then Hitler was right. Then you get a case where if you kill children and get away with it, or even if you don't get away with it, you didn't really do anything wrong. Someone who kills children is not doing anything morally wrong. It's just that blind evolution neurologically wired us to believe a fantasy that it's wrong because gene pools that didn't kill children somehow survived better than gene pools that did. And so if you go with this materialistic view of things, you cannot say that it's wrong to kill children. You can't say that without being a complete hypocrite and just being a fool. So if it is really wrong to kill children, then the universe is bidimensional. There's a physical universe, but there's also a metaphysical dimension of the universe because all kinds of completely non-empirical metaphysical things, facts, objectively exist in the universe. Like, for example, the metaphysical fact that we're equal, or we should have equal protection under the law, or equal rights under the law. If that's true, if there's some sense in which it's true, then we live in a bidimensional universe. Now, the question is, how could that be possible? What does it mean to say that there's a metaphysical universe? How could that be true? And what does that mean about the ultimate nature of reality? If anyone had any philosophical common sense, they could figure these things out. But since they don't, they don't. So getting back to the point of why we shouldn't kill animals, or why, for example, in one sense, it's what's the logic of linking consciousness to rights, to say you have more rights if you're more conscious? For one thing, you could say that if the evil of, let's say, harming people is that they suffer, because actually, let's say we did something we now consider to be harm, like, I don't know, causing someone physical pain or something. What if people didn't feel physical pain? If you pat someone on the back, well, it is sexual harassment nowadays, but it's not in a more objective sense. It's not, if you pat someone on the back, it's not criminal activity under normal circumstances. But if you pat someone on the back and you have these little knives on your fingers or something, and by patting them on the back, you just assassinated them, or mutilated them or something. So in other words, evil is evil because it causes objective harm in the form of pain, in the form of crippling someone, handicapping. So it's when you actually cause objective harm that your action is morally bad. So the less consciousness a creature has, you could say, the less they're capable of suffering in some ways. It doesn't mean you can do anything you want to people who aren't very conscious. That's not what I'm leading to. But if you said that the more conscious a creature is, the more rights they have, you'd have to say something like that. But then again, animals pass the consciousness test. Because most, especially mammals and other creatures, they have more than enough consciousness to justify their rights. And we self-evidently know that's true. We self-evidently know in a larger sense there's good and evil, and that good really is good, and that evil really is evil. And these are irreducible objective qualities, which one justifies itself and one forbids itself self-evidently. Anyway, I hope there's not too much philosophy for you. Does anyone want an aspirin? So Sri Prahlad. Oh yes, Aruba.
I'm just going to ask, so you could apply a similar logic to each one of those 4 principles.
Yes. Okay, let's get them quickly. Run down those.
I was just going to say that if you go right down the line, you can prove.
Let's go to the most. Let's go
harmful.
to let's go to illicit sex.
Harmful sex.
Let's go to illicit sex, which is obviously the more we speak against illicit sex, the more our movement spreads. We know that. So that's an easy one.
Yeah.
Because here's a few arguments. First of all, despite all the birth control devices and all that, sexual intercourse does lead sometimes to pregnancy. And let's see, where should we? Let's say talk about sex that doesn't lead to pregnancy. What if someone says, well, free sex, having sex with anyone you want, is not immoral if you're very conscientious about birth control. So therefore, the sin is not just having sex with anyone you want. The sin is not conscientiously preventing childbirth in a situation where you're not willing or able to take care of the child properly. Because if children aren't taken care of properly, they suffer a lot, so you're causing suffering. If you have a child and you are not in a situation to provide that child all the emotional, economic, spiritual support it needs, the child will suffer. For example, children that grow up in broken homes are much more likely to commit suicide, to commit crimes, to become depressed, to be poor. And so therefore, if someone irresponsibly, foolishly reproduces in a situation where there's not a strong marriage, then they are knowingly causing harm to an innocent creature. And that harm will then be
society at large.
Yeah, imposed on society. So therefore, society and so sex is and is not a private act. It's a private act in the sense that, close your curtains. It's not a private act in the sense that when you have sex, in 2 ways. Let's say you have sex and actually reproduce. That has dramatic consequences for society. It's like, let's say you own some land and a river goes through your land, and let's say you dump radioactive waste into your river, and then it goes downriver, and in the next farm down, people either drink the water or their animals drink it and they all die, or they don't drink it so they can't use the river. Now you can say, I can do whatever I want on my land. However, what you do on your private property is dramatically affecting other people. And when you affect other people in dramatic ways, they have a rational interest to regulate your behavior. So let's say there's sex without pregnancy. why should that be of concern to the government? You know, to use all these cute little phrases, the campaign for degradation employed, like, you know, stay out of my bedroom, keep your laws off my body, blah, blah, blah. All these things, all these like pathetically superficial arguments. Let's talk about sex without pregnancy. If someone engages, let's say, in an unrestricted way in sex, clearly we know, and this can be demonstrated scientifically, that that person will be more and more in the bodily concept of life. Now, there's a simple fact of life, and that is that our oneness is not bodily. And you can say, well, we're all the same species. So what? The animal kingdom shows us that it's very common for creatures in the same species to kill each other. So if you want to, you know, let nature do the talking, lions, sometimes male lions, eat their, you know, kill their own children. No competition. So therefore, it's extremely common for creatures in the same species to kill each other. Now, the more we are in the bodily concept of life, the BCL, the BCOL, BCOL, it's the more we're in the bodily concept of life, the more we will act like animals. Animals are violent. Animals are selfish. And the ability to sustain a peaceful society rests on people's willingness to act ethically. But to act ethically means to act based not on bodily desires, but on metaphysical principles, such as respecting my neighbor, not stealing, not killing, being charitable, so that people in society don't starve to death. So a society can only survive if it has certain moral principles. Otherwise, it descends into savagery, barbarism. And the ability to sustain moral principles depends upon not identifying with your gross physical desires like lust and greed and hunger, like, you know, me Tarzan, you Jane, that kind of stuff. Or, you know, the old caveman thing where, you know, the guy's thinking, I, lusty, I want that woman. I beat woman over the head with my club. I drag woman by her hair into my cave. You know, all that wonderful stuff. So, if you cannot tell people, you cannot create a society in which people are constantly encouraged by the culture to think you are the body and then tell them not to behave like animals. Animals are selfish. Animals are violent. And so if you want a selfish, violent society, encourage everyone to identify with their body. And as soon as you suggest that people should be even a tiny bit decent, you are body shaming people. In other words, don't shame the shameless. Everyone has the freedom to be a shameless animal.
That's self-evident also, isn't it? What you're saying is also self-evident.
Yeah, it is self-evident.
Result of this.
And so therefore, if you say that the purpose of society, that human beings gather together, live in societies under some kind of social contract, which is the laws of the society and the strongly culturally enforced principles, strongly enforced cultural principles, then behavior which drastically leads people to think and act like animals must sabotage the basis of civilized society and ultimately bring the society down in just this, you know, decadent frenzy of self-gratification, which we see in history. So therefore, society has a vested interest to try to prevent people from descending into savagery, bodily concept of life, and therefore activities which tend to degrade people and put them into this bodily concept are against society's own self-interest, against society's stated goals. But of course, who thinks about these things nowadays? Everyone just wants to know what the latest Samsung phone is, or Apple or something. There's very little going on nowadays that you could really call thinking.
I think he wanted to say something.
This mere lad here? Oh. Yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, well, it was related to something you said a long time ago.
Go ahead.
You were talking about the evil genius.
Yes.
Having like the brain in the jar.
Yes.
So it does, even if you were just a brain in a jar, it still presupposes that there's a world, because that jar is in a world.
That's good.
The evil genius is.
I was thinking the same thing, actually. If you say a brain in a jar or a brain in a vat, it presupposes, or you could say, yes, you would have to say something exists, that there is existence and there is something that we could roughly call a world. However, I think for the purpose of this argument, it would be sufficient to say that whatever world does exist is radically different from the world that we think exists.
Yeah, it wouldn't be this world.
No, and that's the key point here, that we are, in the most radical, extreme sense, deluded about reality. Although, I mean, it's true. Interesting what you're saying is, you're saying, well, that something exists. There is existence. There is something that you would have to call roughly a world. But it's not the world that scientists study. It's not the world that everybody thinks exists. And so people are radically in illusion. And we could even imagine certain features of that world that would make it even more unlike the world we think actually exists.
Well, you just have to use your imagination, wouldn't you?
Yes.
There's no experience of that world.
And that's really all we need for the purpose of this argument. All we need is to say that the entire enterprise of empirical science is based on an extreme illusion. And they're actually not studying a real world. Even if there is some other real world somewhere else, but they're not studying a real world. And that's all we need for the purpose of the argument.
If an empiricist says that God doesn't exist,
he's not speaking as an empiricist. He's speaking as a philosophical materialist. And the problem with these clowns is that they don't know they're speaking as philosophical materialists. They think they're speaking as scientists, like that, kind of like the king of the bozos, that Richard Dawkins. Yeah, I mean, the guy's a complete clown. Because first of all, yeah, I mean, he breaks the first rule of scholarship, which is don't speak outside your area of expertise. That fool has absolutely no academic training, no credentials in things like history of religion, philosophy of religion, theology. He has no background. He's not speaking as a scientist. He's speaking as a fool who doesn't know what the hell he's talking about. So, this idea that if someone's a scientist, they know everything, they're like, they're the gatekeepers of reality, is preposterous, because the world is bidimensional. And for example, people, in the way human beings live in the real world, such as Great Britain, we place metaphysical facts above physical facts. Because the physical fact is we have different abilities. So if you wanted a political system that reflects the empirical reality, it would be a dictatorship of, people that have certain IQs or have certain knowledge. But actually, we subordinate empirical reality to metaphysical reality. So not only do scientists not know everything, they have the second-class knowledge. Although when I go to the dentist, they have the first-class knowledge. I mean, I admit it. When I go to the dentist, I worship scientists. But in terms of what's ultimate, or someone said, okay, do you want to have your teeth fixed and then be forced to murder a million innocent people? Or do you want to not have your teeth fixed and not murder a million? So, ultimately, there are metaphysical values. And in fact, we do subordinate the physical to the metaphysical. For example, let's say someone's in a marriage and they're a faithful husband or wife, and their husband or wife somehow is disabled in some way. And, if someone's a civilized human being, they don't leave their spouse. Why? You say, well, I got married to be happy and all this, but there are higher principles of what actual love is, of what actual duty is. And so we can give so many examples where, in fact, people routinely subordinate the physical to the metaphysical. So this clown, this fool who thinks that because he knows some science, therefore he knows metaphysics, he just makes an ass out of himself, and there's other asses braying his glories. That actually, philosophers know that he's just a jackass. If I can be a little blunt there. Yes.
Would you say that there's so much talk about, because at the beginning you were talking about right versus duties, or rights and duties. And it seems like people talk so much more about rights now. You could say possibly because they're trying to avoid the duties, the metaphysical duties.
Yeah, they have a right to, waste their lives, become degraded, degrade other people. Unfortunately, our time is up. And, but, so we can maybe have another class sometime, because there's so much more to say in this topic. We're just sort of, this is like an introductory thing. But ultimately, we can justify. So there are 4 principles. Prabhupada once, when I took sannyas, I told Prabhupada, I wrote him a letter saying I was going to go preach in the colleges in America. He told me, do not present Krishna consciousness as a bunch of rules. He said it's the most sublime philosophy. But even our 4 regular principles, right, which, that holy terror, the 4 regular principles, there are very good reasons. Any rational person would follow or aspire to follow those principles. Yes.
Just wondering, do you or does anyone else that you know of actually confront or debate against or these people that you're talking about, Dawkins, Sam Harris, and
Sam Harris, my God, he wouldn't know philosophy. He tripped over it.
Massively influential.
I don't want to say massively.
But
I don't know if people are confronting them. I heard a little bit from that person just here and there, and it just, every time I listen to something he says, I just think, does he know anything about philosophy? But
generally speaking, until and unless we're there.
No, there are a lot of people who are debating
for the
him.
audience to see.
No. There are actually very intelligent people that are debating and refuting him. And we're not the only show in town. You're just talking about basic theism. Basically arguing or pointing out the silliness of arguments against God. The fact that that person could become popular, it doesn't say much for the planet. You want to say something like, beam me up, Scotty. There's no intelligent life down here. So, yeah, not impressive. But he claims he has a right to do philosophy because when he was an undergraduate, he took a philosophy class. Yeah, but I've looked at some of his arguments. They're pretty bad, pathetic. But there are people who actually are challenging him and refuting him. We could do something. So much to do. It's like those bumper stickers I've seen in America. So many pedestrians, so little time. So, okay, just anyway, thank you all very much. And so maybe we'll do another program before I leave England or something. If you can stand it.
Would be most grateful.
Hare Krishna. Let me just see real quick if any of the people online asked any questions. Here's one, but there's no credit card number. Okay, just kidding. Just checking and see if anyone. I don't think so. When I go online, I send myself little hearts, and things, so I feel good about myself. Just kidding. Okay, yes.
Could I ask a question getting back to the...
okay, last question.
No meaning of meat is that today people are progressively thinking people, they know that by eating meat, you're not ecologically correct.
Right.
You're contributing
Right.
to the environmental destruction of the planet.
Yes.
So that this is a feeling that, or a reason why people want to move towards vegetarianism, veganism. And
Right.
this is a good thing.
It is, of course, it's good.
People are thinking that they're becoming more.
Yeah,
more-
Ramasuka is saying
more
that a lot of people become vegetarian to save the planet. It's good, of course, a good thing. Although environmentalism without animal rights or just general rights is dangerous. For example, it would do environmental wonders for this planet if we killed about, maybe to start off modestly, killed 6 billion people. You know, if you just kill 6 billion human beings, maybe 7, you know, maybe you can do something, do it right. If you killed 7 billion human beings, it would be the best thing that ever happened to the planet environmentally in a long time. It would, I mean, morally, it would be awful beyond description. But environmentally, if you just care about environmentalism,
Might cause the disposal problem.
the what?
It might cause a disposal problem.
Well, I mean, the good news there would be that human bodies are biodegradable, unlike plastic, and so you know, feed the fish or just fertilize the earth. I mean, obviously, it would be it would be an unthinkable evil. But if your concern is simply environmentalism, sure. If there's 7 or 8 billion people, kill 7 billion of them, you know, it'll become the Garden of Eden again. So that's why it's not enough. Environmentalism is not enough. It's necessary. Yeah.
I didn't say it's everything.
No, I know that. I'm not speaking against.
Rationalization.
I'm not speaking against what you said.
Yeah.
I'm just saying that in general, environmentalism is necessary but not sufficient. And yes, of course, it's positive because people are coming to the mode of goodness. Some people they're coming to, and that's good because the mode of goodness, it's like a vantage point from which you can see Krishna consciousness more clearly. So, do we have? Is there a prashant distribution or just no? Just a little bit of fruit salad. Yes. We'll have a little bit of fruit salad available for purchase. So, thank you all very much. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.